So I found the last three precepts to be very vast and addressing complex issues, all of which are actually very magnified in our world right now. And each one touches on an area where people hold significant moral belief systems. And so just knowing this, I know it can bring forward our more rigid and reactive responses. And yet I'm inviting us to contemplate these guidelines, listening with our heart wisdom, that we may open to the ways in which these precepts can strengthen our ability to be both present and participating in our collective enlightenment and awakening. Yes. So I'll start with the 12th precept on protection of life. And it reads, do not kill, do not let others kill. Find whatever means possible to protect life and prevent war. And the essence of this precept is to make every effort to respect and protect life and to continuously move in the direction of non-killing. This precept is closely linked with right livelihood, as the ways in which we live and consume are directly related to the lives and security of all humans and other living beings. And the engaged Buddhism invites us to look deeply into this precept of non-killing to gain insight into the conditions which bring forth war. And some of the causes mentioned are fanaticism and narrowness, the will to gain political influence and economic power, and the exploitation of our society, one society over another. And we can oppose wars once they have broken out, but it is far better if we can help prevent them from ever breaking out. And this is a big precept at the moment in our world. The way to prevent war is to make peace. So to begin with, we must study and observe this precept of non-killing in our daily lives. We move in the direction of peace by combating fanaticism and attachment to views while working for social justice. Living mindfully in our daily lives increases our ability to see the bigger picture and our interrelatedness. And it also helps us decrease the ways in which we contribute to the structures of war. And once we have created a ground by the way we live in our daily lives, we can then work to bring out the real issues of war and peace to the whole nation. And Thich Nhat Hanh provides a few examples of what these bigger issues are. He pointed out that the amount of grain used in Western countries to make liquor and feed is enormous. And some of the researchers have suggested that by reducing the meat and alcohol consumption in the West by 50%, the grains that would become available would be enough to solve all hunger and malnutrition problems in the third world. And when I read this, I was also thinking about how there's mounting hunger in the United States as well, and in many of the first world countries. And another example he gave was the mammoth defense budgets that so many countries have these days. And what I'm seeing is that they're currently increasing very rapidly. And studies show that if we could stop or significantly slow down the manufacture of weapons, we would have more than enough money to erase poverty, hunger, many of the diseases, and much of the ignorance in the world today. And Thich Nhat Hanh encourages working vigorously against the political and economic ambitions of countries, including our own. And with this intention of preventing and ending war, Thich Nhat Hanh saw the important issues and did respond by bringing them forward for national and international discussion. Through contemplation of this precept, let each of us consider what our next step in creating a better world might be. And the 13th precept goes on with social justice, and it reads, "Possess nothing that should belong to others. Respect the property of others, but prevent others from profiting from human suffering or the suffering of other species on earth." This precept is closely linked with being aware of suffering, living simply, right livelihood, and the protection of life. For me, when I read "possess nothing that should belong to others," I immediately thought of land ownership. And I have really deeply contemplated why the rights of Indigenous Americans are currently still at the bottom of consideration by the United States. And I came to the conclusion that our nation state is pretty incapable of standing for justice for the First Nations as long as we believe the earth belongs to us, rather than realizing that we belong to the earth. And I also realized that the US government was actually founded on the rights for landowners, which were all white men at the time. And it is a significant step that people have begun to practice the land acknowledgement by naming the First Nation whose land we are living on. So this is one step we can all keep taking here. And I also wanted to comment on how the First World people have also claimed what belongs to Earth herself. And one of the things I've learned from my friends at the Pueblo are that the Indigenous people here in the Southwest United States knew that elements like uranium belonged to the body of the earth. And my friend Marion has showed me the hills, and the ones that contain uranium, nothing grows on them. And these hills were seen as sacred and not to be disturbed. And the immense amount of suffering which has spread across the earth with the extraction and use of uranium is increasingly apparent. And Thich Nhat Hanh pointed out developing ways to prevent others from profiting through means which cause suffering is the primary duty of legislators, politicians, and revolutionary leaders. However, it is pretty apparent that we have to contribute in this direction as well. Preventing others from profiting from human suffering or the suffering of other species requires us to stay close to nature and also close to the oppressed communities so that we can help protect their right to life. And the 14th precept on the three sources of energy reads, "Do not mistreat your body. Learn to handle it with respect. Do not look on your body as only an instrument. Preserve vital energies for the realization of the way." After years of ascetic practice in the forest, Shakyamuni Buddha realized that mistreating his body was a mistake, and he abandoned that practice. He understood that human beings could not be separated into two distinct parts, body and soul. And according to Buddhism, human beings are actually composed of 5 aggregates: the form, feeling, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. And these 5 aggregates depend on each other to exist and to function. As human beings, we have 3 sources of vital energy: sexual, breath, and spirit. Taoism and many of the Eastern martial arts, along with Buddhism, teach practices for preserving and nourishing these 3 sources of energy. The strength of our practice and our spirit depends on these sources. Sexual energy is expended during sexual intercourse, is what is put forward here. And I also wanted to add that a lot of energy is expended through misguided use of sexuality and the suffering which arises. This wasn't talked about, but it felt important for me to bring forward. And vital breath energy is expended when we speak too much and breathe too little. And spiritual energy is drawn off when we allow worry to overtake us. We can strengthen our vital breath energy when we practice conscious breathing, counting the breath and following the breath. And spiritual energy is vitalized during concentration and the enjoyment of meditation. And Thich Nhat Hanh spoke to 3 reasons why monastics in the time of the Buddha were celibate. And I found this rather interesting to read. They were directly related to issues of population, hunger, and economic development. He says the main reason for abstaining from sexual activity for the monks and nuns is to preserve energy. The second reason was to maintain concentration on their chosen career of enlightenment. If a monk or nun had a family to care for, they wouldn't have the time for their practice. And a third reason monastics refrained from sexuality was to cut off what was called the chain of rebirth. In Buddhism, the first meaning of rebirth is to be reborn in our offspring, in our children and grandchildren. Poverty and disease were the common lot of most people in the time of the Buddha, and is still common in many parts of the world. He points out that such poverty, rather than birth being a joy, giving birth can perpetuate the cycle of hunger and disease in which both children and parents suffer. Therefore, the precept of celibacy had a birth control function. The presence of Buddhist monastics in countries throughout Asia for more than 20 centuries has contributed significantly to reducing the world's population by billions of people. He says, for those who are outside of the monastic community, the guidelines are to express sexuality within loving and committed relationship, to be aware of the future suffering that may be caused through sexual interaction, and to preserve the happiness of others by respecting their rights and commitments. He also asks that we be aware of the responsibility of bringing new lives into the world and meditate on the world into which we are bringing new beings. I thought that was interesting that this falls on Beltane, looking at our responsible sexuality. Thich Nhat Hanh expounds on this by saying, population explosion is one of the most serious problems of our day. Hunger leads to war, and in our times, war is so incredibly destructive. Countries that cannot control their population cannot overcome poverty. We need to be conscious of the future into which we are sending our children and be motivated to act and live in a way that can create a better future for both ourselves and our children. The answer is not to stop having children, it is to make the world a better place. The future depends on the way we each live today. If we continue to exploit and destroy our ecosystems, if we allow the arms race to continue, if we do not curb the growth of the world's population, Earth and humankind will not have a future. Each of our ways of life can be a brick for building a future of peace. Thich Nhat Hanh concludes with saying that to understand and practice this precept deeply, we have to see the relationship between it and our meditation practice, the Four Noble Truths, and the Buddhist teaching of rebirth. And I'll conclude by saying that to practice the 14 precepts of the Order of Interbeing is to become aware of what is going on in our bodies, in our minds, and in the world. If we practice and study deeply enough, we will understand the true nature of interbeing. As we are not separate selves, we can only interbe with everyone and everything else. With awareness, we can live our lives happily, fully present in the moment, while intelligently seeking solutions to the problems we face and working for the peace in small ways and large ways.